Sometimes we hear from the companies who are just before that decision that they are somehow afraid that Google will abandon Flutter. So it's this risk is still echoing among decision makers. How would you address that specifically?
Yeah, will Google kill Flutter is a timeless question. I don't think that question will ever go away. But a little bit of inside baseball for what Flutter means to Google. And for non-baseball fans, that's an old show where people just talked about the most nitty-gritty baseball details possible. So the kind of how the sausage is made, so to speak, what Flutter means to Google. Every time a Google team uses Flutter, they deliver a certain amount of software with a certain amount of headcount. And with Flutter, that headcount always goes down. So people are allowed to work on more projects or switch teams, or there's just greater flexibility for what Google builds every time any team chooses Flutter, because maybe you needed 10 developers for iOS, 10 for Android, 10 for the web. And with Flutter, at just 15, you're totally comfortable. Or you still use all 30 and you ship it really fast. So however you slice it, less effort goes into building software with Flutter. And that's called negative headcount. Let's say an app takes 2 years, you keep those 30 people, but it was estimated it was going to take 4 years if it wasn't Flutter. So that's 2 years of negative 30 people in terms of money that Flutter saved Google. Right. And that's an enormous amount of savings. And at the Flutter team, we love to keep track of that kind of stuff. And so it's by a solid margin true that Flutter saves Google more headcount than are even on the teams of Dart and Flutter. And the teams of Dart and Flutter are not small. So right out of the gate, Flutter doesn't cost Google money to build because of Google's own internal usage of Flutter. And then beyond that, and there's a lot of varying theories for how and why this is true, but we know that developers who use Flutter tend to route more money to Google than developers who don't. And some of those reasons are obvious, like in the States especially, a lot of developers will ship to iOS first, and hopefully they get around to Android. And if a developer uses Flutter, they're much more likely to ship a high-quality Android app. Flutter apps also have more engagement because they just tend to be extremely high quality, and we theorize that that just means that users do more, they have more in-app purchases, they fulfill the user journeys more often in Flutter apps. And then a third possible theory is that Flutter developers just tend to use more other Google products like Firebase and Google Cloud and other things that put money into Google's pocket. And so when Google is a business and is trying to make money and is worried about what is an expensive cost center, what's an expensive drain, Flutter is not one of those. So the combination of Flutter generating money for Google, despite being 100% free, Flutter will never charge a penny to anyone ever, and despite that, does not cost Google money, and is used so prolifically internally, all of those apps would need to be rewritten. The abandonment of the Flutter SDK would, even if the community picked it up, I think it would be a tough sell to continue using internally for those teams. They would, I think, justifiably have a lot of concern about the future of that project, even if Flutter was totally healthy by community maintenance. And so those projects would probably need to be rewritten, so that would be even more cost. You know, not only would you stop getting that negative headcount, but you'd have to rewrite all the apps that have been written in Flutter. And so the possible decision to kill Flutter, of course, no one can predict the future, and Google has surprised us all in the past, but it just doesn't seem to be in the cards.